Forgot my hat. How we doing tonight, folks? Letting people catch up with me. I'm also reflecting on the fact that I inadvertently, in my zest to get on in time tonight, not keep you folks waiting, I put the wrong thumbnail. I used the one from last week. So I'll have to change it after the show. It'll just be for people who want to catch us up on replay anyway. You guys know what day it is. Lance, you promised me you'd be here, and you're here. Awesome. Ken Wilkinson. Good evening, Thrash. Good evening to you, buddy. Glad you could make it. Well, 2 down, a couple dozen to go, huh, gang? So, what else have we wanted to talk about this week, or did we even decide to? Do you guys want to keep it going with our discussion on vintage sci-fi and naming sequels and remakes that are better than the original, or any more word on uh, what the best version of Body Snatchers is? I was gonna watch it tonight. The one with Meg Tilly and Forrest Whitaker is on tonight. It's actually on this TV right now, but I'll watch it on uh, Netflix or something. Lance Chafin, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Ah, yes. The infamous Is Die Hard a holiday film? Yes, yes, it is. I believe Dave settled that some time ago, but it's always fun revisiting these arguments. Keith E says, first of a happy birthday to Danny and Super, who had birthdays over the weekend. Definitely, definitely. Happy birthday to all. My father was actually had a birthday over this past weekend. So to all whose birthdays I have not said happy birthday to, happy birthday. Yeah, Denny Staten would be 58, 59. And not sure. Well, anyway, I'm sure they'll be here tonight. We can ask them specifically. Lance Chafin says Lethal Weapon is one too. Lethal Weapon is a holiday film. I'll take your word for it. I'll take your word for it. I haven't seen those movies in years. I don't recall a holiday thing. Here's one for you. Night of the Comet. Night of the Comet is a holiday movie. And if you watch some of my old posts, you'll see I make a very convincing case of that as well. But there's a lot of holiday movies that you don't think of, pardon me, as holiday movies. And sometimes those are the best. But yeah, Night of the Comet is probably my favorite of the, well, you wouldn't think of it as a holiday film, but it is. Um, Someone said, "What's your favorite Thanksgiving themed uh, movie or special or that type of thing?" A lot of people went with the Charlie Brown one. A lot of people went with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. If you have a preferred one, let me know in the comment section. Lance Javen says The Long Kiss Goodnight as well. Again, off the top of my head, I'll have to defer to your knowledge. I know I'd seen The Long Kiss Goodnight, but I just can't place it. I'm getting to the point where I've seen so many movies that I actually don't remember a lot of them. I'm like, "Oh." In fact, I was just talking with a friend of mine, the one who gave me She Wolves of the SS. I kept remembering it as War. Did I say She Wolves of the SS? See, I'm doing it again. She Wolves of the Wasteland. And I remembered it as Warriors of the Wasteland, even though it's actually known as Phoenix the Warrior. So it doesn't help that a movie has two titles, but I still confuse them as I go. Anyway, Lance Chavin says it had Gina Davis and Samuel Jackson. Um, oh, The Long Kiss Goodnight. Okay, yeah. I'm sure I saw about 2000 it came out, I want to say. Early 2000s? Well, I'm sure it'll come back to my memory at some point. In any event, so let's see. What do we got? 3 people so far. Did we lose one already? Oh no, we got Lance, we got Keith, and we got Kenneth. That's three. I'm sure others will start pouring in. Got a bunch of people on my reminders saying they were going to make it. But I have three people in house and only two likes, which means one of you can still hit that like button. Oh, she played Hitwoman with Amnesia. Well, apparently I'm a film buff with amnesia. Thanks, Lance. Thanks, Lance. So let's see. Topics for tonight. Keith, I believe you had a good topic suggestion, and I'm trying to remember what it was. It was something we talked about on Facebook. But anyway, if you can think of it, let me know. Um, additionally, rest in peace, Mr. Conroy. I want to mention that while we have a chance. I'll probably mention it again when more people show up. And John Anderson died today, by the way, father of Gillian Anderson. I'm sorry, Jennifer Aniston from Friends fame. R.I.P. to him as well. Oh, and Lance Chafin says, and Gallagher. Yes, Gallagher. I remember him from over 40 years ago. He was in a TV show, among others. It was called Make Me Laugh. Some of you might remember that show. I believe it was hosted by Chuck Barris. But you would pull people out of the audience, and you had three comedians, and they would try to make the the guest laugh. If they couldn't, they won money. But they usually cracked up just because they were so embarrassed being put on stage. Gallagher was one of the talents they often had. Keith E says, so should I stay here with you or go to the other streaming Thrash Condo Pawns event? Thrash Con. There's a pun in there somewhere. No, I didn't pop out and pop back in like I did this time. So if there's a fraudulent Pondo, looks we have a Benedict Pondo in the works. But no, I would stay here. John Collins in the house says, what's up, people? John, what's up to you too? Good to see you, man. Glad you could make it. Lance Chafin says, I got my retro shirt on too. We should all wear our retro shirts as a way of saying, thank you, Pat, for just being you. Any of you catch his Barry Livingston interview? I asked him, like, when you first met Barry Livingston, did you say Dr. Livingston, I presume? John Collins, John, he says, Bob, did you get my phone call today? I'm sorry, I did, but by the time I checked my phone, I was getting ready to go on here. Oh, wicked sorry, bro. Can I give you a call tomorrow afternoon, maybe? Would that work out for you? While we're on the subject, and I don't know what happened here, um, you sent me a medical update, and it was very, very encouraging. But I noticed you also sent me a text message. Somehow that got booted to my already read messages. I don't know if I picked my phone up in a funky way or just thought that was an old message. Anyway, I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you on the two calls you've made to my phone. Call you tomorrow, I promise. Let's see. Mr. Led in the house. Hey, Thrash and everyone can't hang tonight. Just stopped in to say hi and give you a thumbs up. Mr. Led, that's more than enough. Thank you so much for joining us. You stay as long as you feel up to it, and if you have to go, whenever you go, I'll get my goodbyes out of the way early. Peas and chicken grease. Thanks for stopping in. Big Guys 45 says hi, everyone. And hello to you. Well over 800 now. I'm very, very, very proud of you, by the way. Oh, and did you make that music video yourself, by the way? The one for New Pollution? That was very slick. Again, for those of you who haven't subscribed to Big Guys 45s, check his stuff out. He's doing some great stuff on his channel. Nostalgic old 45 songs, commercials, and recently vintage music videos. John Doe says hello, people. Hello to you too, John. So glad you could make it tonight. Oh, Big Guys 45 says dinner time now. Chicken noodle soup. So I'll be back later. Enjoy your Campbell's. Soup is good food. It is the cold and flu season. John Collins says, yeah, there was some sort of weirdness with the text message, so I just sent you the email, and tomorrow is cool to call me. Thanks for everything." No, thank you. I Yeah, like I said, I may have when I was going through my messages, sometimes if you just sort of, touch one with your thumb, it appears as though it's already been read. So I thought it was one of your earlier messages. It's sent twice too, by the way. But anyway, I'm glad I got it. I ended up getting all the information in the email you sent me, but I didn't want you to think I was ignoring my phone. I wasn't. I'm just uh, predisposed to being electronically uninclined. Lance Chafin says, hit that like button, please. Big Guy 45 says, yes, I made it myself, edited together on iMovie. Came out really slick. I don't know if you're probably way too young to remember this. Some of you older people might remember. Do you remember Night Flight on USA back in the day? They used to put out some really slick experimental music videos. Um, that's kind of what Big Guys 45 music video kind of reminded me of. Check it out. Trey Myers in the house says, "Hey guys, hey to you, Tracy. How you doing, Bubba?" Oh, and by the way, you and John, I've heard you had some really, really traumatic weather down in Florida. I'd like to think you guys all missed it, but I hope you guys are all safe. John Doe says, watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers 80s version. The one with Meg Tilly? That's from 93. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was going to watch it myself, actually, but I'm going to watch it on Netflix or one of those streaming services later. Not a bad rendition of that movie. It had some merits. When um, Tug and I, and among others, do the retrospect, I'm sure that one will come up. A lot of people having fellowship. Oh, Les Javen says, button, folks, thank you. Yeah, we actually extrapolated what what you meant was. Excellent, excellent. John Doe says, yes, with Meg Tilly. Meg Tilly and Forrest Whitaker plays an army officer, and Arlie Ermy. Again, it's not a bad rendition. The only one I couldn't get through, I'm gonna give it another attempt for the retrospect, was that terrible one where they don't have pods, it's all done through casual contact, and ugh, I'm gonna give that one another shot, but that one is possibly the worst rendition. Although technically there are some others. There are a few other movies that borrowed from uh, uh, Body Snatchers, although a lot of them also shamelessly ripped off uh, The Puppet Masters by Robert Heinlein. In fact, here's a little one for you. Leonard Nimoy is, of course, in the 1978 version of Body Snatchers. He's also in Brain Eaters, which was a shameless ripoff of The Puppet Masters. Um, so he actually is in two different versions of mind controlling aliens. Little secret there. Well, not a secret, a fun fact. It's not a secret because I just told everyone. Liz Chafin says, I like strange invaders. They all have their merits. John Doe says, you're talking about Invasion with Nicole Kidman. Yes. Where they spread through casual contact, and I started watching it. I just couldn't get into it. It just didn't click. But like I said, I will get through it just for the purposes of this retrospect, if nothing else. John Doe says hello to anyone I missed. We're only at 6 so far. I think a lot of people are watching Body Snatchers with you on this TV. Mr. Lynn says, once more before I go, the original Body Snatchers. Again, opinion is divided. And most people will say you got to start with the original. Although I was talking with a friend of mine, by the way, and he too agreed with me that 1 million BC, the Hammer film, is superior to the original. So there are some remakes that are better than the original. John Doe says that was a horrible rendition. Never been a big fan of Nicole Kidman. I don't know why. For some reason, I don't know why she never clicked with me. Maybe because she's a bad actress. I don't know. But anyway, speaking of science fiction, by the way, I'm sure you already know this, but Dave Sundstrom has a Wonder Woman live chat going on this Wednesday, and he got Retro Nerd Girl to do it with him. Retro Nerd Girl is very, very tough to get as a guest on your chats. So, Dave, tip of the hat to you. But I got to tell you, Dave Sundstrom and Retro Nerd Girl on the same show, it's going to be. I got to work, but I will be watching it in replay. But guys, check it out. I don't know how many of you are fans of Retro Nerd Girl. You should definitely check her out and subscribe as well. I know a lot of you are sci-fi fans as well. She puts out some absolutely amazing science fiction retrospects. They're very, very thorough. They're very entertaining. Love them. But anyway, this coming Wednesday. Oh, Dave, I'm sorry. It's either 8 or 8:30. I can't remember at the top of my head. But anyway, you can catch on his community page. If those of you who can make it Wednesday, check out Dave's live chat. Lance Javen says, "Love Planet of the Apes with Heston." He's actually in two, as I'm sure you know. He stars in the original, and then he bookends the second. He's in the beginning and the end. They wanted him for the whole thing. In fact, the original screenplay for Planet of the Apes 2, it was basically him as a one-man fighting force. He gets free, and in his attempt to try to stir up the humans to basically fight back against the apes, goes into Ape City with some stolen weapons, and again is a one-man fighting force until they ultimately catch him, and he sacrifices himself to start the human rebellion. And they went an entirely different direction with Planet of the Apes 2, but they dusted it off, and they used that very premise for Omega Man, which brings me to my next point. And I'm sure I've done this before, but I'm going to do it again. Can anybody name all 4 post-apocalyptic films Charlton Heston has been in? If you've been paying attention, they should roll right off your tongue. And Wajammin is in the house. Wajammin, your dad jokes are awesome, but this theme you have on wedding jokes, it's just great. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to Wajammin yet, please, Wajammin, whichever. Check out his stuff. He's been doing some great humor on his channel. Oh, speaking of which, today I posted, um, with many requests, another installment of my top 10 dad jokes anthology. Let's see what we got. Because I've been babbling. John Doe was never a fan of the Apes movies. Really? Never grabbed his interest. I could see that. I mean, I love them myself, actually. I was actually obsessed with them when I was a kid, but to own their each. John Doe says Omega Man. Yes. And we got Planet of the Apes 1 and 2, which leaves one more. I'll give you a hint. We were talking about it last week. Let's see. Oh, what Jimmy says, thanks, Rash. You're very, very welcome. Lance Javen says, 1 like and 7 in here. Come on, folks. Really? I see 7 likes. So we got 7 people and 7 likes. So by my calculations, we're doing okay. Dave, Superplex in the house. This is early. Early now that you mentioned it. We were supposed to go on at 8:30. But I was so afraid that I'd have technical problems that I decided to uh, hit the ball rolling, as it were. That's probably why we haven't seen as many people. But yes, yes, we are. I started a tad early, but I'm glad you made it. You're right on time. Don't worry, you. Lance Chafin says Apes, Omega Man, Soylent Green, and Apes 2. Yes, those are the 4. John Doe says, was it Soylent Green? Yes, it was. Kevin Davis says, aloha. Hey, Kevin, I'm so glad you could make it. Thanks for joining us. And a lot of people saying hello to each other. I did say 8:30. I want to start a little bit later because some people can't make it until later, but well, we'll see how things play out. Virgin gin and tonic. Got a bit of a scratch today. It's nothing serious. I think it's a change of season. The weather really sort of tanked up here on Cape Cod. It's got really, really, really chilly tonight. And so, well, I had the conversation going for a little bit. Oh, Daryl Johnson says, Bob! I thought I was Uncle Bob. Well, I'll still call you DJ. Deej, good to see you. Kenneth Wilkins says Charlton Heston was in Midway. Midway is one of my favorite war films of all time. Makes a phenomenal double feature with Doya, Doya, Doya. Yes, and Charlton Heston does star in it, although it's a great ensemble cast. And it's so funny. I remember years ago, I had to have an operation when I was in high school. And I want to say on the Hallmark Channel at TBS, they showed Midway. And there's a whole deleted segment involving the Battle of the Coral Sea, the one they talk about, but they don't actually show. And for years, I thought I imagined it because I just saw it when I was in the hospital. And no, I found it subsequently. But yeah, it is a great movie. We're talking the 1973 film as opposed to the one that was made only a few years ago. Nothing wrong with that film, but I prefer the one with Chuck Heston. Trey Myers says, hello to all I have missed. Likewise to you. John Doe says, how many sci-fi movies did Doug McClure make? You may know me from such films as uh, Tom Lermy. Hello, Thrash. Hello, everyone. Tom, so glad you could make it. Thank you. Actually, I was just talking about Doug McClure. He was in both of the Time Forgot movies, The Land That Time Forgot and The People That Time Forgot. He was in what? Not Journey to the Center of the Earth, At the Earth's Core with Peter Cushing. Um, I'd say he was in Warlords of the Deep. I'd say he brought in all kidding aside, he probably made like over a dozen sci-fi films, and I saw most of them as a kid. Zuplik says Midway was so cheaply made that it ripped off scenes from Tora 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 to save money. They did economize. They did economize on that film. Most of it was most of the budget was spent cast. It had an enormous cast. The kid who played his son was played by Eddie Albert Jr. And of course, as you know, Eddie Albert Sr. was in the Pacific. He was a Pacific War veteran and had some really shocking stories of carnage. Little fun fact there. Ziplik says Doug McClure was in Krakatoa, east of Java. And as I'm sure, Dave, you already know, Krakatoa is west of Java, or at least it was. Lance Chapin says Doug McClure, People That Time Forgot, and The Land That Time Forgot. I loved The Land That Time Forgot. For some reason, when I saw The People That Time Forgot, I was so disappointed. I don't know why. For some reason, that movie just bugged me. Um, I don't know, probably because it killed off his girlfriend, and I don't know. I wanted to go in a different direction. Zuplik says they made a mistake. Yes, they did. But Krakatoa, east of Java, was this big film for years. Well, mistakes are made. I even make them on occasion, but there you go. So let's see. Any other Doug McClure films that I haven't mentioned? Any ones that were was it Amicus Studios, the ones he worked for? I want to say Amicus, but Zubik says the biggest explosion ever. Indeed, in fact, I believe it actually altered the global weather pattern at the time. But there you have it. John Doe says the woman in The People That Time Forgot played in Superman 2. That's right. Yes, she did. Can't think of her name to save my life, but yes. And Tom Leary says, we had discussed a character name from Car 54. What was the name of the character? And was the actor who played the part revealed? Yes, Pat talked about it. It was Hank, wasn't it? And I believe Pat did a post on it, I believe. Zuplik says Troy McClure was inspired by Doug. He certainly was. He certainly was. The guy who was always working, but for some reason never became a household name. Zuplik says Margot Kidder. No, Margot Kidder was in 1 and 2. I believe this woman he's talking about played one of the Kryptonian evil villains, and tall brunette whose name eludes me, but was a fairly well-known English actress in her day. And of course, Margot Kidder wasn't even in three. Margot Kidder was, or she came in at the end. They used, oh, what is her name? She was in Smile. She was married to Mike McKeon. Is married to Mike McKeon. Lance Jefferson, Sarah Douglas. Oh, is that the name? Okay, thank you, thank you. John Doe says Troy McClure was in the Erotic Adventures of Hercules. I'll take your word for it. Kevin Davis confirms Sarah Douglas. Thank you. Daryl Jones says I liked At the Earth's Core. It had Carolyn Monroe. It certainly did. She was, yes, she certainly was in that. Um, and I kind of like the hokey special effects in that too. By the way, it was actually it was just fun. Uh, yeah, Superplex is also about the Troy McClure fun fact. Again, I'm going to take your word for it. Lance Stevens says Annette O'Toole married to McKeon. Yes, Annette O'Toole, who played Lana Lang in Superman 3. Kevin Davis says, I'll have to see that movie. Let me know what you think. um, John Doe says, it's in the Simpsons episode. Is it true that since oh, you guys are gonna tell me out here. The guy who voiced Troy McClure, SNL icon who died tragically, killed by his wife in a murder suicide. Is it true that they don't air episodes that have Troy McClure in them anymore out of respect for him? Which is a pity because I thought those were great. He also played the skeevy lawyer and also the grifter who was inspired by the Music Man. Lindsay James says Annette played Martha Kent in Smallville. I thought she played Lana Lang. Martha Kent? I will defer to your knowledge. I might be confusing things. Azublik says Annette O'Toole was in the remake of Cat People. I thought it was Natasha Kinski. Is there another remake, or does she play a different character? Phil Hartman, Tracy, thank you. Phil Hartman, I was groping for that. Tom Laramie also says Phil Hartman. John Doe says they play it rarely. And yeah, everyone's Hartman. I knew it. It was on the tip of my tongue. But when you're actually reading comments and like trying to be hosting, sometimes like facts escape you. But thank you for you people. You guys all know what I was talking about. Oh, Sarah Douglas was in V, The Final Battle. She was. What character did she play? I didn't see V, The Final Battle. I just can't place her. Zublik says Natasha Kinski was in the movie too. So I'm assuming Annette O'Toole was a different character, not the lead character in the remake of Cat People. Leslie James says Annette was in Superman 3. Yeah, I thought she was. But I thought she played Lana Lang. But what do I know? I haven't seen that movie in 30 years, perhaps more. John Doe says Sarah Douglas played Ursa. Yes, that was one of the Kryptonian villains, as it were. Lance Javen says, no, Kevin, it was Jane Badler. Oh, you thought that was her. Oh, okay. Now I'm with you. Although she could have been playing a different part in Me the Final Battle. That's another thing, by the way. Sometimes these people are in those. Kevin Conroy, by the way, a lot of you may not know this. He played Ted Kennedy in a miniseries about the Kennedys years ago. So he just wasn't only known for Batman. But rest in peace, Mr. Conroy. Liz Javen says Thrash, she did play Lana Lang. Okay, thank you. Yeah, when you mentioned Martha Kent, I get a little confused, but now we're on the right page. So now we've got it. Thank you, Kevin. I'm bad my tongue. Thank you, Lance, for clearing that up. And now Kevin Davis. Sarah played Pamela in V, The Final Battle, who was killed by Diana. There you go. Yeah, I knew she didn't play Diana, but I wasn't sure who she played. Yeah, but yeah, she actually did a number of fairly big English movies back in the day. Back in the day. So let's see. So we're almost 8:30, which means hopefully people start piling in, by the way. Big Fred Smithberg, here we go. I'm late watching Jeopardy. No problem. As it turns out, in my attempt to avoid being late for computer glitches, I actually got here early. So I've actually been on for about a half an hour, but mostly just having fellowship and chatting. Tracy Reminder says Conroy was at a lot of shows. Yes, he certainly was. Dave Sundstrom in the house. Dave, I gotta congratulate you. Tip of the hat. I saw that you have Retro Nerd Girl joining you for your live chat on Wednesday about Wonder Woman. I have been singing the praises. You and Retro Nerd Girl in the same show. It's going to be a classic. I can tell you that already. Unfortunately, I work Wednesdays, but I promise I'll catch every minute in replay. And not to speak for everyone here, I'm sure anyone who can will make it. Lance Javen says, love the Beastmaster with Mark Singer. How could you not? Kevin Davis says, R.I.P. Kevin Conroy. And yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Fred Smithberg says, Dave in the house. He certainly is. Dave Sundstrom says, I'm excited for Wednesday as well. It's gonna be a blast. I am so looking forward to it. I will be there in spirit, I promise you. Lynn Stevens says, "Was also with Tanya Roberts." Yes, she was. She was in that as well, wasn't she? And that reminded me of something. Mark Singer was actually in an episode of the Planet of the Apes TV series. Very young Mark Singer, but yeah, he was in one of those shows as well. Fred Smithberg says, "I remember Andros from Wonder Woman." Now, well, I don't want to give the game away. It was on. Wasn't it on two different networks? Anyway, I don't want. Dave will be covering all this in his show, so let's not uncover any stones that will negatively impact their big splash on Wednesday. But yes, Wonder Woman was a great show. Tom Lemmy says on the Alice Cooper smoking in the boys' room info, thought Alice Cooper sang a rendition, but Motley Crue sang it on Alice Cooper last tour. I could have sworn we established that both of them did it, but in any event, I promise tonight I'll actually check it out. But I could have sworn. Yeah, Dave, while you're here, did Alice Cooper do a cover of "Smoking in the Boys' Room"? There was some gray areas. Some people say he did. Some people say he didn't. I could have sworn he did. Lance Javen says, "How about trances with Tim Thomerson?" I saw that when I was in college. Fred Smithberg says, trivia question. Roddy McDowell played what character in the Planet of the Apes franchise? Well, in the TV show, he played Galen, but in the movie, he played Cornelius, with the exception of two. He had a scheduling conflict, and that was played by somebody else whose name eludes me. And he later goes on to play. Give me a second. He plays Cornelius, and then he plays a descendant. So he actually technically plays three different people. He plays the original in the Chuck Heston movie, and then he plays a descendant later on, and then he plays Galen in the TV show. So I believe I have them all covered. Daryl Johnson says, "Well, I wouldn't say a great show. It was okay." Which show are we talking about? Well, whichever show, I'm sure it was okay or better. Oh, the unapologetic geek is in the house. Hey, Tug. Time for the tugboat to arrive, but a bum. Always great to have you, Tug. He just posted a great retrospect on the '83 film classic War Games. Check it out. Truth of Myers says, I prefer the first season of only of Wonder Woman. I thought it was more creative. Let's just see. We got a lot of people having fellowship. That Cornelius and Caesar. He picked his own name. I completely forgot that. It's a great scene too. I'm surprised I forgot it, but yes. So those are the three characters he played. Uh, and now Ape City will lose its king. Dave Sutherland said Brownville Station sang the original version of Smoke, and I haven't heard the Alice Cooper version. Maybe I did dream it. I could have sworn. Motley Crue did do a version of it. I did that much. I will do. Kevin Davis says I remember of the Crew version of Smoking. Good. Tug says Caesar, you're killing me, Thrash, with my song. John Doe says, I just did a Wonder Woman marathon on TV this weekend. I can see that. That could be fun. Les David says, Tug, how about a nice game of chess? That's from War Games. John Collins says, I'm back. I was on the phone. Glad to be back, John. Hope feeling well. Oh, Emily Miller in the house says, what's up, heathens? Emily, always nice to see you. Thank you so much. So if I were just doing some minor movie trivia, mostly on Planet of the Apes, but I'm open for suggestions. Long story short, in order to avoid technical problems, I hopped on a little bit early, and as a result of which, I started early because I had no technical problems. Wonders never cease. Tug says the only way to win is not to play. Daryl Johnson says, thanks for the warning, John. Wow, I'm actually caught up. Emily Miller says, my suggestions would get us booted. I'm game. Sarita Admin in the house says, hello, everyone. Hello to you too, SA. Good to see you. SA. Hola, SA. Let's just see what else we got. A lot of people having fellowship saying hello to Sarita. And, Zuplik says, does anyone recall that Doug McClure starred in The Virginian? I did not recall that, but a lot of actors at the time did TV westerns because there were just so many of them. Tom Lemmy says they have a YouTube clip with Alice Cooper on Smoking in the Boys' Room, but it was just the Brownville station. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I dreamt it. Or you know what it may have been? You know what it may have been? Sometimes when acts are on like TV shows and stuff, they'll do covers of other people's music and whatnot. Perhaps they never released it, but I saw them perform it on something else, or perhaps I'm just gonna wire across in my head. I don't know, but I could have sworn Alice Cooper did Smoking in the Boys' Room. Lance Javen says WOPR from War Games. Yes. John Doe says, what's the worst remake of The Birds or Psycho? Oh, I'm sorry. John Doe says, what's worse? Remake of The Birds or Psycho? I'm going to go with Psycho. Although there's a really horrible movie called Birdemic, which is, it doesn't even count as a movie. While they're filming it, you would actually see tourists and stuff just walking around in the background. They don't even try to keep them out. Kevin Davis says Psycho was bad. Tug says trivia Q. How did Linda Harrison get the role of Nova? Well, at the risk of being not politically correct, she was romantically involved with the head of Fox Studios at the time. Daryl Johnson says, never seen either one of them. You haven't missed much. Dave Sutherland says, anybody remember Alice Cooper song Clones? Not off the top of my head. Not off the top of my head. Zublik says she was the studio head's girlfriend. Yep. That was pretty much it. Emily Miller says, I did watch Weird Trust, the made up story of Al Yankovic. I still got to see that. I still got to see that. John Collins says, so Bob, if you're going to have an awesome 80s film party with broadly successful 80s films, which three would you show in your triple feature? Amazing question. Amazing question. And we're gonna do strictly 80s movies because they're gonna be movies that would like illustrate how great the 80s were, or at least what the great feels of the 80s were. Um, One would have to be Repo Man. Repo Man is the quintessential 80 movie. Period. I would then go on to say, who? I would probably go with uh Weird Science, just because it's like a fun 80s romp. And then for the third, it would be a toss up between Return of the Living Dead or Night of the Comet. And I would probably go with Return of the Living Dead because that has more of that 80s feel to it. So I'm going to stick with those three movies unless I can think of something better, or you folks can suggest something better in the comments, and I will defer if I feel your suggestion has merit. Ellie Sheedy is hot in War Games. Yes, please. Wasn't she like 17? Emily Miller says, today, not trust. Oh, I'm sorry. Why aren't we trusting today? I think she's referring to something earlier. Well, anyway, I'm sorry that you don't have trust today. Fred Smithberg said, did anyone ever watch reruns of the Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show? I never watched it. Any good? Some of them are actually very good. In fact, when I was doing my retrospect on the stuff, most of the Alfred Hitchcock Presents were thrillers and mysteries. Ray Bradbury wrote an episode called Special Delivery, which is about a kid who raises mushrooms and come to find out they have mind controlling properties. And that one is great. There are a lot of other good ones. I love the Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show, the original. Tug says, okay, you get a point. Well, thank you. Lance Chafin says she was married to Richard Zanuck. Were they ever married? I know they were romantically involved. I didn't know they were married. I believe you, but I didn't know that until I hadn't heard that. Well, if I did know it, I forgot. John Doe says in Birdemic, the birds aren't real. No, they're really, really, really terrible CGI. Tug says, Emily, I really want to watch it. I assume you're talking about the Weird Al biopic. Uh, Kevin Davis said, Fred Smithberg, some episodes were decent. Zublik says, I think no 80s movie review has to include. I think no 80s movie review has to include Pixote. Okay. Emily Miller says, Tug, it's awesome. Good, good. Oh, and Dave Sundstrom says, so did you like it? She says it's awesome, so that has been already answered. Kevin Davis says Nerds is the ultimate 80s movie. Pretty solid, pretty solid. I'll give you that much. Rose Myers says, message retracted. Zuplik says, no, Full Metal Jacket. Great movie, but again, we're talking about movies with an 80s feel to it. And that's set during the peak of the Vietnam War. Well, the 80s wasn't until substantially longer than that. Emily Miller says, I loved it, Dave. Made me laugh, made me cry, or was allergies and a slight chuckle? No reason it can't be both. Tug says, I would have to include Die Hard. A lot of people would. Fred Smithberg says, Pixote with a question mark. He too is confused, so I'm not the only one. John Doe says, I would have to say Lost Boys has to be in the top 10 of 80s movies. You know what? Yes, it does. It really has that 80s feel with the music and the feel, the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it. All right, I will grant you that. Emily Miller says, my trio is Legend, great one, Labyrinth, and Lost Boys. Going with an L theme, huh? And you have a thing for high fantasy. All great films, all great films. I'll add Lost Boys to my trilogy. I'm not sure which one I'll have to give the boot to. Zublik says, a hard hitting Brazilian film about a searing exam of the underclass, Fred. Yes, but it take place during the 80s. The only Brazilian film I could think of from the 80s was Kiss of the Spider Woman, and that didn't really have an 80s feel to it. More of a World War II feel. Uh, Les Javen says, Dave looking forward to Wednesday. Tug says, yeah, they got married, but after Planet of the Apes, they divorced a decade later. Oh, okay. I probably heard that somewhere and just in one ear and out the other. Tom Murray says, John Doe, what about Stand By Me? Again, great movie, but it doesn't really have an 80s feel to it because it's set in the 50s. Um, I would stick with movies that were only made during the 80s, but had an 80s feel to them. Because let's face facts, guys, the 80s had its own feel to it. It really did. Oh, Dave says my top three would be Empire Strikes Back, Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and Batman. All great films. All, as I've said before, Empire Strikes Back is my favorite of the original trilogy, which means it's my favorite of Star Wars. Pee Wee's Big Adventure. Again, high fantasy on a whole new level, and who doesn't love a good Batman? What you mean would add Breakfast Club would be the top 10 80s movies for me. You know what? I think you guys might have something here. Top three is just not enough. We have to go at least a top 10. Zublik says some might include Raging Bull, but I found that film boring. Wow. Wasn't that the first movie that Joe Pesci did with Robert De Niro? John Doe says, just clump the Brat Pack in one shot. You know they hate being called the Brat Pack. Zublik says, but it was an 80s film. Oh, I'm not denying that it was an 80s film. I'm just like saying is to be a true 80s movies to me, not only does it have to be made in the 80s, but it has to be akin to the 80s. You see what I'm saying? Um, but then again, like there were some phenomenal films in the 80s that had nothing to do with the 80s. There was The Color Purple. There was Out of Africa. There was The Killing Fields. There was some outstanding film in the 80s, but those weren't about the 80s. I would put together a film festival that would people like let's say people were born in this century, the poor devils. When they saw these movies, they would say, "I grok the 80s. I may not understand what it was like to live then, but I could see what the 80s are driving at." Emily Miller says, "Dave, Star Wars is a given on any list." Dave Sundstrom says, "Ah, 80s feel. Disregard my top three then." Well, I think two of them did have an 80s feel. Pee Wee's Big Adventure and Batman. Um, I think would count. But if you want to rethink your list, please do. Tug says I threw in either Big or Bachelor Party too. Bachelor Party, definitely. Definitely Bachelor Party. Liz Javen says Goonies, Gremlins, Critters, my trio. Kevin Davis says message retracted and a message retracted to you. Uh, oh, I just wow, I'm way behind. Oh, here we go. Uh, Fred Smithberg says message retracted sounds like a great 80s techno horror thriller. Yes, it sure does. Daily Dan's good stuff in the house. Love the Lost Boys. You got to subscribe to Daily Dan if you haven't, by the way. Dan, feel free to start dropping links. Oh, by the way, I love the stuff you were doing on Boggy Creek, by the way. And where did you find that found dragons footage? Tug says nobody has said a bad 80s movies yet. There were some, but not a lot. Ooh, John Doe says Escape from New York, especially now. Love it. Lance Chafin says Porky's 1, 2, and 3. running the gambit there. Emily Miller says 80s feel would be Zapped. Love it. Breakfast Club. Okay. And Summer School. Outstanding list. Um, oh, Riz Iv Wolf Gore? Reza Wadagore. Reza Wadorf Gore. I'm sorry, I butchered your name. I always get people's names wrong in the very beginning. New to our little festival this evening. Welcome to the live chat and put Back to the Future, and that's a great one. Zublik says 80s film feel would be Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'll buy that. I'll buy that. Tug says The Last Starfighter. Um, set in a distant galaxy, but I will accept it. Dave says live summer school. I'm assuming meant love summer school. Spell check. Why have you abandoned us? I guess he corrected put love. Daryl John says Revenge of the Nerds. A lot of people have it on their list. Kevin Davis says Porky's. Porky's 2 was okay. 3 was meh. John Collins says Ferris Bueller's Day Off really does a good job of pulling you into that world of making you wish you were on their adventure with those characters, especially Cameron. So that would be one of my films. I'll buy that. Zuplik says another would be 9 to 5. Okay, Risky Business. Other Chafin says Risky Business. Definitely, definitely. Kevin Davis says Summer School was the best Mark Hamill movie. I would have to agree. Zuplik says another would be Working Girl. Great 80s woman power movie. Love it, love it. Fred Smithberg says they should have made movies named after uh, Arnold one-liners. Stick around. Let off some steam, Bennett. LOL. I can see that. I'll be back. I'll be Beethoven. Truth Mine says I love Metropolis. F form is form is content. Form is content. Hello, form is content. Is clapping us. Thank you, by the way. We're just discussing if you could create a list of your favorite 80s films, and we've decided for the purpose of this discussion, not just films set in the 80s, but films that have that 80s feel, that 80s flavor to them. What would your three be? It's turning into a regular film festival, but let us know what you think. John Doe says Principal with Jim Belushi. Emily Miller says Higher Form. There we go. Tug says The Running Man. Tom Laramie says Back to School, Beverly Hills Cop, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Tom Laramie, that's an excellent, excellent list. Zublik says a great 80s film is Mr. Mistopheles. Where are you finding these cult films? Liz Javen says Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop, Cobra. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Tug says Emily Mine, which we've discussed is Hell in the Pacific with a sci-fi format. Zuplik says yes, T-Pawns. I'm just going to call you Rezi for the purposes of this discussion. Rezi says Beverly Hills Cop. A lot of people have that on their list, and I loved Beverly Hills Cop when I was a kid. Still do, really. Kevin Davis says the Tug Enemy Mine was a good movie. Yes, it was. Lance Chafin says Iron Eagle, Delta Force, and Invasion USA. Going the ultra patriotic route. What, no Red Dawn? Tug says Wall Street bleeds the 80s. You know what? It certainly does. Form is content. Says Savage Steve Holland movies like Better Off Dead were my 80s movies. Loved Better Off Dead. I was just talking with somebody about that one the other day. Absolutely phenomenal film. Fred Smithberg says Invasion USA, LOL. I went to see that in the theater. You know what? I went to see that when I was a kid with my father and my uncle, who was actually a Vietnam veteran, one who never, ever, ever spoke of his experiences in Vietnam. But the one time he ever let on that he uh, had any experience, there's a scene where Chuck Norris there's a couple of the foreign terrorists who are dressed like MPs and are trying to trap him, and one of them apparently was Vietnamese. And when Chuck Norris tries to get information out of him, this uh, uh, imposter says a filthy word to him in Vietnamese, And my uncle says, "Ah," and he translated what that was. And I'm like, "Okay, thank you." And that's the one time he ever discussed it in any form. John Doe says Ghostbusters. I'm surprised that one hasn't come up yet. Troll 2. Weird Science. That one actually made my list. I'm just going to surf down and just read out the titles at this point. Trading Places. Great one. Oh, Dan says, I heard Jay Leno got his face burned off today. Very sad. Yes, he's actually recovering. I actually, from the area, he's actually recovering quite well, but it's going to take some time. He was very lucky. He was working on one of the cars in his garage, and there was a gas explosion. Uh, Scarface, Push It to the Limit. I'd buy that for $1. Field of Dreams, good one. Anything with Michael J. Fox. American Werewolf in London. Secret of My Success, The Great Outdoors. Keith E says, "Happy birthday, super welcome to the side of this side of 65." When I'm 65, Uncle Buck. Star Trek 4, one of my favorites. Xanadu. Did anyone see that in the theater? No, I saw it on HBO, and it's a Xanadon't. If you ask me, I'm sorry, Fred. I had to. I couldn't resist. Um, Dan asks, "So would Back to the Future count? It's about the 80s, but they go back to the 50s. I'd count it. I'd count it because it still has a 80s feel to it. Garbage Pail Kids, why not? Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, definitely. Field of Dreams, uh-huh. Society, probably my favorite 80s movie. Not familiar with that one. Fred Smithberg said Cobra LOL. Oh, Karate Kid. I hadn't even thought of that one, but yes. Um, and I just jump, which means I'm way behind. So I'm gonna pick up with the Karate Kid and just scroll down. Scrooged, The Verdict, Cobra, You're the Disease and I'm the Cure. Fred Smithberg says, Better Off Dead was great. It certainly was. Ellen Miller says, I think any movie with 80s music would work. So basically every uh, movie with teenage young adults. There you go. Where's my $2? Kevin Davis says, like the original Red Dawn, can't stand the remake Red Dawn. Oh yeah, I know. I'm with you. I'm with you. Uh, Big Trouble in Little China. Oh, Big S45 says, I'm now trying to reach 850 to 900 subs, so feel free to subscribe to me if you feel like it. If you haven't yet, thanks a lot. Fam, LOL. Fred Smithberg says American Ninja, very, very 80s esque cheesy movie. Lance Javen says Karate Kid, Adventures and Babysitting in Space Camp. Why not? Tom Lerman says, I like Caddyshack, Easy Money 2, Rodney Dangerfield movies. There are a lot of really great 80s movies. Fred Smithberg said, did anybody mention Over the Top? LOL Stallone. Tug says, subbed, big guys. There you go. John Collins says, something that I would find to be interesting would be a film done now, which would bring all the 80s in the John Hughes universe together and interact with each other. Totally 80s flashback. That'd be great. That really would. So look, says Jay Leno got burned. I bet Conan is dancing in Shag. That's not very nice. Form is content. Some movies could only be made in the 80s, like Forbidden Zone. Exactly. I love the Forbidden Zone too, by the way. But yeah, that's definitely a movie that could only be made back then. I just jumped, but I think I'm getting pretty close. So, yes. It looks like Kenneth is going. Good night, everyone. Good night, Ken. Take care of yourself. Thanks for joining us, as always. Tell Memory says 48 hours, another 48 hours, and Police Academy 1 and 2. Tug says Tron. Did I tell you I met a man who actually did some special effects on Tron? Yeah, they couldn't win the Academy Award for it because I sublet out to a South Korean company. He was very disappointed. He wasn't in the film industry either. He was working in not Harvard, but one of those really, really high tech areas. He was a computer programmer, and they actually came to him and says, "Could you do computer graphics for us?" He's like, "I suppose I could." Ziplik says the Nightmare on Elm Street was made in the 80s. It certainly was. Lance Javen says the Golden Child. Tug says Buckaroo Banzai in the Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. Resi says Society is a psychological body horror genre a la Reanimator with Billy Warlock. Disturbing, funny, very 80s. I'm not familiar with that one. I mean, I know Reanimator, but I'm not familiar with it. I'll have to check it out. Zublik says Tron was in the 80s. Yes, it was. Uh, Les Javen says They Live, Prince of Darkness, Into the Mouth of Madness. All great stuff. Tug says Willow. I wanted to like Willow. I really, really did. I just, well, at some when I have more time, I'll discuss my feelings on Willow. Dilly Den says one of my favorite '80s movies was Vibes with Goldblum and Cyndi Lauper. If you've never seen it, you don't know what you're missing. Peter Falk was in that too, I believe. It had one of the worst openings in American movie history when it opened up. Fred Smithberg said, "Forget about Tron and the Apologetic Geek, classic '80s." Oh, Tom Memory says, also like Coming to America. Dilly Jan, dropped a link to Big Guys 45s. Thank you. Kevin Davis, I like Space Camp. 2000 minus 48 hours. And Illinois says the original April Fool's Day. Fred Smithberg says The Last Starfighter, all CGI special effects, groundbreaking for the 80s. Tug says it would be set in Sherman, Illinois. Big Guys 45 says, in fact, that Thrash is still barely just over 200 subs is absolutely sad and criminal. LOL. Let's get him to a higher number. All folks. Thanks a lot there. Thank you. Thank you, big guys. I'm a little surprised that I'm still moving rather slowly, but hey, if anybody has any suggestions, share, post, get some friends to come on and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Zublik says, I think Victor Victoria was made in the 80s. I believe it was. Batteries not included. Um, oh, do we have. We had here we are. Bozo the Clown is a bot. Haha. Thank you, Emily, and everyone else who got them. Anybody here remember Everlasting Love with Rex Smith and Rachel Sweet? It's a remake version from 1981. I actually don't. Ziplik says Flashdance. Oh, I love Flashdance, actually. Daryl Johnson says Robert Preston was in The Last Starfighter. The Music Man. I did know that. I did know that. Zublik says Roadhouse. And here we see Bozo the Clown. Oh, Zublik says Desperately Seeking Susan. Len Smithberg says Tug. I need input. Fred Smithberg says Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan '82, best of them all. I would have to say yes. Daily Den says R.I.P. Bozo the Troll. Wajamin says 16 candles. Okay. That's certainly a goodie. Resi says Karate Kid. Excellent. John Collins says, I don't mean to be controversial as far as the entertainment. Don't we wish to live in a world where movies that were made in the past could still be made today without the phrase couldn't be made today? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. There's just a level of sensitivities today on various subjects that would make it difficult to make a movie. What some people consider offensive today, John, in the 80s was considered just good natured fun. Humor back then was intended to push the envelope. So you didn't want to go outright to offend somebody. But if it was slightly offensive, everyone would blush a bit, but be like, "Oh, you naughty boy," and we'd all go with our lives. Nowadays, it's a little more complicated than that. And I'm not saying which is right. I'm just like saying they're two completely different times, I'm afraid. Emily Miller says, John, I don't think any movie couldn't be made today, but some things weren't right even then. Well said. Well said. The things that were wrong today were wrong back then. People just ignore them. Lance Chavin said The Legend of Billie Jean. I was just talking about that movie just the other day, too. Zubelik says Night Shift. Emily Miller says, good one, Lance. Richie says the Cannonball Run. Yes, definitely. Fred Smithberg says, I like Night Shift, Superplex. Tug says Fright Night. How has nobody mentioned Fright Night yet? You know, it's so funny. When we started talking about cult horror films, I almost threw that one back out there. But I am surprised we didn't, particularly because we were talking about Roddy McDowall. Roddy McDowall stole that movie. He was absolutely phenomenal in it. Great soundtrack too. Oh, and by the way, okay, you guys tell me what you think. For years, I thought Peter Vincent was a play on Peter Cushing, who did all the Hammer horror films, and Vincent Price, who did all the American Corman horror films. But I was recently found out I was on someone else's channel, the Horror Girls review or something like that, and they mentioned that uh, Elvira, whose actual name is Christina Peterson, I believe, something like that. She was preceded on her creature feature show by a gentleman whose name was Vincent. So Peter Vincent could also be a reference to Elvira and this Mr. Vincent, who was the original host of Creature Feature. It's funny because the Hungry Jerk isn't here, and I thought he was going to be here tonight. He would actually know. He actually knew this first Vincent host of that show. Let's just see. Suplex says Splash. I love Splash. Fred Smith says probably because we talk about it all the time. We do. We do. This channel has an obsession with Fright Night. Trethros Meyer says Purple Rain. Purple Rain. Purple Rain. Lance Javen says, love that song Invincible by Pat Benatar. Definitely, definitely. Oh, Action Jackson. Oh, if we're gonna do weird 80s action movies, um Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, which was supposed to be a franchise, but they only made the first one. Tug says, I always assumed that too. Formus Content says, oh, and when I said Forbidden Zone couldn't be made today, I was referring to the aesthetics and the fantastic, cheap, talented pool. Yes. Well, on any number of reasons, that film couldn't be made today. Emily Miller says, great music in Purple Rain, Tracy, but I don't like romance movies. The biggest romance in Purple Rain is Prince with himself. Uh, ah, I just jumped. Oh, crying out loud. Um, oh, here we go. Fred Smithberg says, I kind of like Jackson Jackson. Smithberg says, biggest flop of the 80s was Heaven's Gate. I believe it was actually Howard the Duck. Trevor's Meyer says, Cassandra. Cassandra Peters. Thank you. I knew Christina wasn't right. Cassandra. Lance Chavin says, Footloose. Sorry. Didn't like it. Didn't like the remake either. Resi says 80s was the decade of the super vehicle, maybe more in TV series where vehicle was the vehicle, Airwolf, Street Hawk, Knight Rider, etc. I can see that. John Collins says, I'm showing my true colors, and our creativity is supposed to make people think and become more thoughtful, not to give them credence to just jump on the all too quick offended train, if that makes sense. It does make sense. Unfortunately, most people do the opposite of what you do, I'm afraid. Daryl Johnson says, I liked Remo. Emily says, Indiana Jones. Dan says, yeah, weird movie, Buckaroo Banzai. Yes, indeed it was. Form is content. Remo Williams was a super enjoyable. It certainly was. Fred Smithberg says, "That was a fun movie, Remo Williams." When Wilford Brimley is in the movie, it's fire. Then, Kevin Davis says, "Leonard Part 6." Zublik says, "Tremors." Les Javen says, "Christine Cujo Creep Show." Love all of them. Tug says, "Resi, once anyone mentions Knight Rider, I instantly get the theme stuck in my head." Lance Chafin says, "The Thing." I assume you mean John Carpenter's. And then Lewis says, "Lance Long had a lot of good movies in the 80s." There were a lot of good movies in the 80s. Tug says, "LOL, Kevin, I totally forgot about Leonard Part 6." A lot of people did. Oddly, it's the only thing Mr. Cosby's really ashamed of. Zublik says Heaven's Gate destroyed United Artists. It certainly did. It certainly did. Emily Melissa's King, not long. I was wondering what you were made back. That clears that up. Thank you. Oh, Tug says Tremors was 90. Oh, very, very good. Kevin Davis says Ishtar was a bomb as well. It certainly was. Formers Content says, I liked Ishtar. It wasn't a bad movie. It just bombed. I mean, I saw where they were going with it. It just didn't, well, it didn't hit the mark, as it were. Zublik says none of those films sank a studio like Heaven's Gate. Well, I'm talking about like financial dollars. I mean, I believe Howard the Duck lost $50 million or something ridiculous. Les Javen says Spies Like Us, Stripes, Back to School, all very good. Trathos Minor says Body Double. Wow, kind of violent. Must confess I did like it. I had the movie poster at one point. Rezia says I like Godzilla movies of the 80s, Toho, and the Jackie Chan movies. Liz Chafin says Fatal Attraction. Suplex says the remake of Breathless. Richard Gere. Emma Miller says Caddyshack. Loved Caddyshack. Because 45 says Ishtar was a guilty pleasure. LOL. Kevin Davis. That's the fact, Jack. Tug says Midnight Run. Great movie. Fred Smithberg says 80s had plenty of fun. Check your brain at the door. Mindless movies. They certainly did. Liz Javen says Jewel of the Nile. Body Heat. Form is Content says, oh, War of the Roses. I want to watch that again. It was a good flick. Ah, Fick. Form is Content. Fick. You have a new nickname. How very fickle of me. Emily Miller says, Fred, most of us were brainless teens, so it didn't matter. Wajamin says, like father, like son. Lance Javen says, once bitten. I remember that one. Lance Javen says, best defense. I remember Eddie Murphy actually apologized about that movie. Kevin Davis says, some of us are still brainless, Emily Miller. Wajibin says, walk like a man. I assume you're doing the Four Seasons. Walk like a man, talk like a... Looks as Pretty Woman. John Collins says, are you talking about Heaven's Gate, talking about the people who thought a comet was going to take them to heaven, or Mad missing something? By the way, they should make a historical movie about that. Oh, no, Heaven's Gate was actually about it was about a range war in the Old West. And it's loosely based on an actual range war that took place in the Old West. And I'm racking my brains. I don't think I ever actually saw it. I only talked about it in classes and stuff. Kevin Davis says, I enjoyed Romancing the Stone. Great movie. Big S45 says, Evan Miller, I'm a proud atheist too, LOL. Not that I have a problem with religious people, just saying. As Javen says, vice versa. Tom, the hungry jerk, I'm so glad you could make it. I was getting worried. Says, hi, everyone. Hi, Tom. Good to see you. Wajimeen says, with Howie Mandel. A lot of people having fellowship. Oh, by the way, we're talking about the quintessential 80 movies, not just movies that were made in the 80s, but actually had the 80s feel to them. Tug says, speaking of the 80s movies you definitely can't make today, The Tot or the Toy, I'm guessing you mean, with Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason. Oh, yes, he corrects himself, the Toy, not Tot. Uh, Big S 45 says Barack Obama. Oh, Mr. Former President is here. Do we have a bot that says Barack Obama? I didn't even see them. Darrell Jones says we were just talking bad about you. uh, Fred Smith says, "Don't forget Excalibur. That movie is a dream to some, a nightmare to others." Very good. Oh my gosh, we do have Barack Obama, and his message has been retracted by Lance. Thank you. Uh, oh, I see. It's gonna be one of those nights, isn't it? Ultra Those Minus says, got a scat. Have a great night, guys. You as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Fred Smith says, another John Cusack movie I liked a lot was The Sure Thing. That's a great one. Persistent, isn't he? Oh, by the way, while I have you, Hungry Jerk, the guy who was the host of Creature Feature, something Vincent, or was it Vincent his first name? I think Vincent was his last name. We were talking about him the other day. Um, who was that? Do you remember who we were talking about? His name was something Vincent. So we were just talking about him. I can't remember the whole story about him. So if you can remember what we were talking about, please feel free to pipe in. Uh, Resli says 80s movies with the biggest hair. Huh. I would say Night of the Leapers. Emily Miller says he hasn't said anything wrong. Why boot him? Well, I haven't actually seen anything he said, by the way. So, Working Girls, things new for Plex. John Clone says, "What is the first major motion picture to ever come out in the '80s?" Not trivia, generally asking. First big '80s movie. Um, Probably Empire Strikes Back, because that was 1980, and that was gigantic. Uh, Fred Smithberg says there should be an ED209 stream bot in this chat. You have 20 seconds to react to your message, to retract your message. That's a good idea. Kevin Davis says you should check out Hot Tub Time Machine. Form is Content says biggest hair movie, Spinal Tap. No one's gonna laugh at Night of the Leapers. It's about giant rabbits. Get it? Get it? Big hair. I try so hard. Darrell Johnson says someone say a bad word. Oh, not that I know of. Resi says Evil Dead 2. Fred Smithberg says E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Oh, Tom says that is Vincent Van Dahl of Creature Features. Thank you. We were just talking about him, but because I believe it was Cassandra Peters and Vincent Van Dahl that created the name Peter Vincent, vampire hunter in Fright Night. Tug says Tom is coming through with the trivia. He's really, really good at trivia. Because I think E.T. was 81. Oh, yeah, that's why I went with Empire Strikes Back. Fred Smithwick says Dr. McCoy was in that movie. He certainly was. John Collins says, no, I mean the first movie to ever come out in the theaters as of the first week in January of 1980. Ooh. Yeah, somebody look that up. Go to Wikipedia. 1980 cinema and go to January. Form is content. Form is content. I can't talk tonight. Says OMG. Fred Smithberg says, did anybody ever own the ET Atari 2600 game? I thought those were all recalled. Tug says, isn't it Lepus, not Leapers? What did I say? I may have said Leapress. I think I was putting an R in there, Leapress. But Lepus is, yeah, it's the other word for bun bun. Let's see. Forbes says, I was hearing leapers. Leapers, creepers, night of the creeps. Um, Fred Smithberg says Godzilla versus Son of Lepus. I'd pay good money to see that. My wife's laughing at me hysterically. Apparently, she thought my singing was hysterical. Yeah, she's actually doubled over now. She's dying. She's dying. You could probably hear her. Yeah, it was that whole Jeepers Creepers thing. Um, I get no respect at all. John Collins says it would. Now you gotta make me laugh though. John Collins says it would stop it. It, it would just be interesting to know the first movie of the 1980s. Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Daryl Johnson says Godzilla versus UB. Godzilla versus UB40. Red, red wine. Oh, now she's gonna start laughing again. Dilly Dan says, "LOL, you would pay to see Godzilla eat roast rabbit." Yes, yes, I would. I would. Lance Javen says Godzilla versus Pacific Rim robots. Godzilla. Fred Smithberg says, "I want to see Mrs. Pons." Oh, she's off camera, I'm afraid, but I will pass on hellos. Hello. She's very, very camera shy. The closest she ever came to one of my projects is when you go to see my Night of the Generals micro review. She's the one holding the camera, and you see like her thumb, her one of her fingers briefly while she's holding the camera. Kevin Davis says Godzilla versus the spiders from Valley of Spiders. I would go with spiders from Mars, but doesn't Godzilla fight a spider somewhere? Wasn't there a spider on Monster Island that like bites its eye? Resi says, Thrash Bondapon's a nice topic. Which genre of movie encapsulated the 80s the most for you? I'd go with horror myself. Um, most of the 80s movies I can think of are probably more light teen comedies, probably because I was a teen at the time. So that's most of what I saw. But those really seem to capture the spirit of the 80s. There were a lot of great slasher films. It was the age of the slash movie. So I'll give you that. Um, and I was also really, really big on science fiction, of course. But I think the light comedies really encapsulate the 80s more than anything else. Or the dramedies, like The Big Chill. In fact, I'm surprised none of us have said The Big Chill before now. The Big Chill probably is the 80s movie. Because a lot of those Brat Pack movies were really the Big Chill for teens. John Collins says, Bob, will your wife ever make a cameo? Never. She's very, 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 very camera shy. She usually just walks by and makes a weird face at me or a gesture of some kind to try to throw me off my game. That's fun for her, but I'll never get her in front of the camera. That's one of the reasons she got me this backdrop because sometimes they're actually our living room couch is right there, and that way I can do my show and not disturb the family time. Les Javen says Godzilla was Spiga, which I believe is Japanese for spider. Uh, oh. Daryl Johnson's first movie of the 1980s was Fame, 1980. Hmm. Zuplik says those corny rom-coms. I wouldn't go with the corny ones, but yes. Tug says, okay, according to Wikipedia, the first release of 1980 were Cardiac Arrest, Just Tell Me What You Want, and Windows. Windows? Okay. Little product placement by the New Pro people. Dilly Den says, I currently watching Godzilla versus King Kong. That one's my favorite. I'm up on the part where they flying Kong with the helicopters. Uh, took a break to watch. I don't blame you. Uh, Dave says never heard of those films. Unapologetic. Just tell me what you want. I did. I don't know the other two. Uh, Lance Chafin says the Warriors versus the Outsiders. Ooh, well, the Warriors was 70s. The Wanderers, maybe the Wanderers versus the Outsiders, and those were both set around the same time period. I'd go with I don't know. I'd go with the Wanderers. Fred Smithberg says, "Oh yes, the Brat Pack stuff, the Breakfast Club." Yep. Emma Miller says, "I'm camera shy too. I totally understand." Fred Smithberg says the Warriors is great. People, I'm begging you. I have a really, what I think is a really cool retrospect on the Warriors where I come up with a game changing theory. You've got to go on my channel and look up my post on the Wanderers, I'm doing it now. Warriors with game changing theory. Please, I beg you, because I want to talk to you guys about what you think. If I'm right, if I'm wrong, whatever. But please check out my Warriors retrospect. Fred, I'm asking you specifically. And let's see what else we get going here. Rezzy says James Bond kind of flopped in the 80s like disco music did. It was a lull. It was a low period for James Bond movies. Well, View to a Kill. Come on. View to a Kill. I wanted to like that movie so much, and it was weak for a James Bond film. Zublick says Fame versus Flashdance. Who would win? Definitely Flashdance. Definitely. I had such a crush on her when I was a kid. Tug says, "Yeah, I don't know them either. I'm just reporting the fact. Well, it was before you were born." Kevin Davis says Roger was too old by then. Tim did a decent job. We're talking about the James Bond films, of course. Fred Smithberg says, "Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?" John Collins says, "Bob, did you enjoy the film Arachnophobia? I was still young, so it scared the jeepers out of me. I'm arachnophobic. It still scares me." Daryl Johnson goes, "Warriors come out to play." Lance Javen says, "Daryl, the Explorers, and Mac and Me." Good triple feature. Fred Smith says, "I will check out your Warriors retrospect." Thank you. You don't have to do it now, but in any time in the next day or two will be just fine. Zublik says, "Do you consider Xanadu a flop?" I do. Tug says, "The Dalton Bond flicks are awesome. I don't care what you say." Hey, it's a free country. It's a free country. To me, Roger, and I know a lot of people didn't like Roger Moore. He was the first. He was the Bond when I started watching James Bond films. So I kind of like the Roger Moore Bond films. But I got Sean Connery is really the quintessential James Bond. James Bond. Lance Chafin says she's a maniac. Flashdance. Yes, she was. She certainly was. Um, Tug says, "I was alive in 1980. I mean, I was only one, but I was alive." I thought you were born later in the 80s. But okay. So you're an 80s kid too. Awesome. So Blick says, "How about Endless Love?" Yeah. Yet another Brooke Shields Lolota type film. Ugh. Lance Javen says, "Tug, License to Kill." Kevin Davis says, "Well, I have to go now. You all have a good night. You too. Ciao for now, Kevin. Thanks for joining us." Lance Chafin says, "Blue Lagoon." Now, Blue Lagoon I could get into. John Collins says, "So, Bob, now that we know that is a backdrop, how expensive was that backdrop? Because it looks very genuine." I think my wife, I think it was $100 and she got it on sale for less than $100. It's very sturdy. It's very sturdy and well lacquered. She didn't go bargain basement. She got a good one, and it's two sided too, which means I could mess up one side and still have the other side. Tug says, "Yeah, Lance, License to Kill is one of the absolute best Bond films." Fred Smithberg says Roger Moore played James Bond before he played James Bond in the movie LOL True Story. Oh, James Bond? I'm not familiar with that. I know he played the Saint, and of course, then later on was the Persuaders. Resi says Sudden Impact, the Deadpool were okay. Dirty Harry movies, damn, he could do with an R-rated reboot today. Foreman's Content Man with the Golden Gun was my first Bond movie in the theater. So more was the man. Couldn't appreciate Connery until I was much older. Yeah, I just like I said, I think Moonraker was actually the first one I saw in the theaters. My dad took me to see it. That was around 1980, wasn't it? Lance Javen says Tug loved the end chase scene with the big rigs. Tug says, John, I didn't know it was a backdrop until it fell on him. It did. It did. It actually, I leaned back and it bumped and then it fell into me. It was hysterical. Zublik says, was Waterworld an 80s film? No, that was 90s. 90s. And not very good. And he went on to make The Postman, or Dirt World, as many people called it. Foremost Content says, yeah, Moonraker with Jaws. That was a great time. That was it was. It was a very, very fun film. Watch, I mean, says Zuplex 1995. Tug says there was a remake of a Dirty Harry in the works about a decade ago with Eastwood directing and Hugh Jackman in the title role. Didn't happen though, obviously. That could have been fun. Les Chafin says Scott Eastwood could do a reboot of Dirty Harry. Um, Not too familiar with him, but I'm sure you're right. Fred Smithberg says Roger Moore played James Bond on the Mainly Millicent show in 1964. I honestly, I did not know that. I did not know that. That is a real fun fact. Um, well, I recently found out that Brian Blessed, who played the leader of the Hawkmen in Flash Gordon, when he was a kid and they would play Flash Gordon, he always insisted on playing the leader of the Hawkmen, Voltan. Um, well, that's just a kid's game, but I just thought that was very, very cool that he grew up to play the character he always wanted to play. Rosie said Waterworld is a dirty movie, isn't it? I don't know if it's dirty. It's just not. I was making a joke because both men would be Dirt World because one takes place on the land and one takes place on the sea. John Collins says, "What was the movie with Sean Connery was in the rainforest?" It was the first time I saw nudity in the theater. Oh, he plays the doctor who discovers the cure for cancer. I forgot. All I can think of is the Emerald Forest, but it's not the Emerald Forest. But that's all I can think of, I'm afraid. Zublik says No Way Out was an 80s film. It was it was a remake. Wait, No Way Out was a remake? The Kevin Costner film with that really slick surprise ending. Huh. I had forgotten it was a remake if I ever knew at all. Lynn Chafin says Scott Eastwood is Clint's son. Oh, I got that. I don't know enough about him. I don't. So I'm having trouble picturing him as a Dirty Harry. So you would know better than I would because you clearly are more familiar with his career. Resi says Josh Brolin would make a good Dirty Harry. I can see that. I can see that. Lance Chafin says Flash Gordon. We were just talking about that. Tug says you learned that Brian Blessed. Fact from me, methinks. I knew I learned it from somewhere. Thank you for pointing that out. Like I say, Tug is awesome, very, very good with fun facts. I thought I had gotten it from one of your posts, but honest to God, I couldn't remember where I got it. But I always thought it was a very fun fact. So, yes, I will defer to you. Thank you, Tug. And Medicine Man, yes, Medicine Man is the Sean Connery film that takes place in the rainforest. Fred Smithberg says Buzz Aldrin's mother maiden name is, wait for it, Moon. You made that up. Really? That is too cool. That is too. Oh, that is very. That is a fun fact. Form is content says, okay, since it came up, did anyone ever watch Flesh Gordon? Um, I've only read about it. I've never actually seen the film. I've heard it actually isn't bad, but I haven't actually seen it. Uh, Tug says, ah, yes, Flesh Gordon. But Daryl Johnson says, when you play a movie, Tug, you should put a serial on first, maybe Flash Gordon. They're not on public domain, I'm afraid, but I like where you're going with that. Zublik says, yes, it was based on The Big Clock. I assume you mean No Way Out. Huh. If I did know that, I had forgotten it. Of course, I haven't seen that movie in probably 20 years. John Collins. Hey, Bob, is Ian AOL? No, he just isn't available this week because he's in the process of moving. Terrell Jones said he's under the floorboards. John, thanks. I'm gonna have nightmares now. Zublik says John ENC is moving, so he took 2 weeks off. Exactly. Tug says I could run one of those Flash Gordon serials if I remember correctly. Only the first serial is copywritten. No kidding. So you could do it. That'd be a lot of fun. That would be cool. Uh, so let's see. Resi says I remember seeing an R-rated Ewok adult movie that wrapped me. From then on, warped me. I'm sorry, warped me. From then on, I could certainly understand that. Form is Content says, speaking of remakes, I recently watched the original DOA and loved it, but I haven't seen the 80s remake. Um, I believe I've seen both. I'm just having trouble remembering much about either one of them off the top of my head. I haven't seen either one of them in some time, but I remember them being good. Les Javen says Lone Wolf McQuaid. I did like that movie. I saw it in the theater too. Fred Smith says I saw it in the theater, Lance. Yeah, I saw it too. Lance Javen says no retreat, no surrender. Daryl Jones says one episode before the movie though. Oh yes, yes indeed. John Collins says, "Hey Bub, how big is your studio?" This, it's probably about 4 feet from the wall to this corner here, and about 3 feet or 4 feet from here to behind me, and then it kind of pinches. So it's only about 3 feet here. So it's small. My garage is much bigger, but the internet access is very, very spotty. That's why I use the personal computer when I do my live chats. That post I did today with the top 10 jokes, that was in my garage, or the bridge, as I call it. Tug says Lady Hawk. I loved Lady Hawk. Between the high fantasy and the comedy and the action and the high fantasy, and Rutger, I've always loved Rutger Hauer. Great film. Resi says the relative lack of accessibility of movies in the 80s made taboo stuff so tantalizing. Not like today with the internet. I remember a buddy having a VHS of Clockwork Orange when it was banned. Um, was it? Well, I don't think it was ever banned in the States. It was banned in the UK, I believe. I don't think it was ever banned here in the United States. It got an X rating at one point, but they sanded it down. I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. John Collins says, I'm listening to Leslie Jordan's book. He was a hilarious comic mind, even when he wasn't trying. Those are the best kind of comedians, so natural and easygoing. I'll have to check it out. Dave Claroni is in the house. Hi, gang, late to the party, but happy to be here. Dave, so glad you could make it, man. So glad you could join us. Good to see you. Ellen says, Rizzy, you can't find a few movies on the internet like Dogma. Um, but there's more and more every year. Farmers Content says, okay, I think my 80s top three would be Repo Man, Night of the Comet, and Dudes. I'm not familiar with Dudes, but like the song goes, Farmers Content, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. A lot of people saying hi to Dave. Liz Javen says, Eye for an Eye, Forced Vengeance, and Octagon. Loved Octagon. I might have been my first movie with Chuck Norris. Forced Vengeance. Why is it that ring a bell? What's the premise to Force Vengeance? Because it's something wicked, wicked familiar, but I can't place it. Oh, Resi says Dogma's on YouTube, Emily. I watched it a few weeks ago. With commercials? Lance Javen says Silent Rage. Tug says, speaking of the big hair in the 80s, Sting in Dune. I will kill him! I will kill him. Retro Nerd Girl. Oh my, thank you for joining us. Says, hey, Thrash managed to get out of work early tonight. So glad you could make it. Oh, and by the way, I was telling everybody, I was singing your praises. I heard about you and Dave having the collaborative live chat this coming Wednesday where you're talking about Wonder Woman. Ironically, I got to work on Wednesday, but I'll be watching it in replay. And trust me, everyone knows to check it out, by the way. Double plus good, you doing a live chat with Dave. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely outstanding. Emily Miller says, really, Resi, it's hard to find on DVD. She's talking about Dogma. Formus contends says, Dudes was a punk western with John Cryer and Flea. I gotta check it out. Oh, Retro, by the way, we're talking about if you could, we were doing like an 80s film festival. And we've decided the best way to approach it is come up with your three favorite 80s movies that were not only made during the 80s, but really, really captured the 80s feel to it. Like when you watch the movie, you go, oh my God, this is such an 80s movie. Mine, and there's no wrong answers. Mine was Repo Man, Weird Science, and Return of the Living Dead. We've had other suggestions such as um, The Big Chill, Vibes, uh, Fright Night. Well, hundreds of them. I won't go through all of them. But so far, there's been no wrong answers. I have a lot of really, really good 80s film buffs here. Les Javen says, hi, Richard Nerd Girl. Looking forward to it. Yes, everyone's looking forward to your collaboration on Wednesday. Formus Content says, Dogma prices on DVD were super high a few months ago, but I think are into the 20s now. Oh, Formus Content says, Dogma streaming rights are trapped up in the Weinstein mess. Ew. Zublik says, does anybody remember Out of Africa? Dave. I told you that was one of my favorite 80s movies. Remember, I said, because we were talking about 80s movies that have the 80s feel to it, and people said, well, what about 80s movies that don't take place in the 80s? And I said there were a bunch of them, and Out of Africa was one of my favorites. This recap is for the benefit of those of you who tuned in late. But no, Out of Africa is actually one of my favorite 80s movies. Has Sam Neill in it, who's one of my favorite actors. He played Riley, Ace of Spies. Fred Smithberg says, Stand By Me. Definitely. Although, again, it's set in the 50s. But Superplex, I'm just busting your chops, man. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Hey, you bust mine all the time. Least I could do. But yes, it's a great movie. Lance Javen says Zuper with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. Yes, and Sam Neill. Resi says Thrash Pondapons. A related topic could be actors who were in their twilight years in the 80s and those actors that were just starting out but went on to be three huge in the 90s. That could work as well. That could work as well. John Collins says, Bob, what about what time do you think you may call tomorrow? So I'll be ready. I don't know. I'd say between 1 and 2 my time. Retro Nerd Girl says, sweet. How about Videodrome, Tron, and Back to the Future? That is a quintessential list. Yes. Oh, and by the way, did I ever tell you I actually met a man who actually did special effects for Tron? He wasn't even a special effects company. He was working for a computer lab. They were physicists and whatnot. And the studio came to them and said, "Could you put together some uh, computer graphics for us?" And they were like, "Sure." And they were going to give them an Academy Award for special effects, and they couldn't because they sublet out some of the material to the South Korean company, and it fell under it didn't meet uh, Screen Actors Guild uh, requirements because they sublet to non-union contractors. But yeah, Tron is one of my favorites. Not to mention Back to the Future and Videodrome. Zublik says a passage to India. I don't recall. I mean, I'm sure I saw it, but I don't recall much about it. Uh, Fred Smithberg says Retro Nerd Girl. The last two have been mentioned. I don't know about Videodrome. It would count. Lance Chafin says The Hitcher with Rutger Hauer. Oh, definitely, definitely. Dave Filoni says Breakfast Club and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Back to the Future. All great ones. All great ones. Zublik says The Cook, the Thief, his wife, and her lover. um, Tug says, I'm going to log off now. Catch those Zeds. Good night, all. Tug, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening and take care. Peace. Lance Chafin says the Hitchhiker, I want to die tagline. A lot of people saying goodnight to Tug. Resi says, Lance, was that French fry in the Hitcher finger, or is it the Mandela effect messing with me? No, it was a finger. That's when C. Thomas Howell has the choking jag, and that's when the local cops catch him. Retro Nerd Girl says, "What about Fame? Definitely Flashdance. More than definitely. That was actually people said Fame or Flashdance. I picked Flashdance. Footloose. I never liked the original Footloose. I didn't like the remake either, but I'm going to give it to you because a lot of people love it as an '80s movie." Forms Content says The Stuff was an early '80s movie, very much of its time, making fun of yogurt and all things, which was new to American markets. I actually do a retrospect on The Stuff. If you check out my channel's earlier post, you will see it. Oh, by the way, that we were remember how we were talking about Alfred Hitchcock Presents, the Ray Bradbury short story that was done as a Hitchcock Presents is called Special Delivery. Very similar to this stuff. Helen Mirren, Fred. Les Javen says Gorillas in the Mist. John Collins says, well, to answer the one question, people in the Twilight Zone, in the twilight of their careers, Twilight Zone of their careers, in the 80s would have been Hugh Cronin and Jessica Tandy, whom, of course, were tethered together via marriage. That's a very, very good reach. Very good, John. Thank you. Thank you. Suplex says Sophie's Choice. Ooh, grim. Form is Content. Oh man, I just remembered the HBO series, The Hitchhiker. I loved The Hitchhiker actually. In fact, a friend of the channel, Spooky Creepy J, did retrospects on a lot of those episodes. That OD feeling is probably my favorite one. That was the one that stars Gene Simmons. Zuplex says Cocoon. Lance Javen says My Bloody Valentine, The Fog, and Shud, all good stuff. Resi says, wasn't Footloose a tragic movie about people with ankles that were brittle and malformed? Not quite, but I love where you were going with it. Oh, Big Guys 45 is back. Welcome back, Big Guys 45. Good to see you. Good to see you, young man. Tom Logan Drake says, Can't Buy Me Love or Lucas. Oh, great stuff. Great stuff. What Jamin says, WB Big. Yeah, Big is good. Joel Jones says WB. Richard New Girl laughing at Rezzy's joke. It was a good one. Dilly Den's good stuff says A Fine Mess with Howie Mandel and Ted Danson. I'm sure I've seen that. I can't remember anything about it. I love Howie Mandel, and Ted Danson's great too. Was that a heist film? Um, and Miller says, "Big guy, I told you we would probably still be here, and we are." Oh, Richard Jurgen brings up a good one. St. Elmo's Fire. I like that one. I like that. I remember that. That was just I just saw that on late night TV not too long ago. Les Javen says, Tommy Boy, just one of the guys. Daily Den's good stuff. The Survivors with Robin Williams. I remember that one. Form is content. Fun fact: I live about an hour's drive from Purdy, Missouri, where public dancing is, or at least was, illegal. You made that up. Really? No kidding. Form is content says a fine mess was Blake Edwards, wasn't it? I almost suggested SOP, but there's nothing particularly 80s about it. Zublik says Urban Cowboy. Um, I remember that one. Emily Miller says form. It's if it's illegal, it just makes it more fun. But can you really make public dancing illegal? I mean, really? I would depend on the type of dancing. Lynn Chafin says an officer and a gentleman. Louis Gossett Jr. at his finest. Um, there were a lot of great movies that came out in the 80s, didn't there? John Collins says, speaking of the 80s films, I thought of. Oh, I just got a message over my message. John Collins says, speaking of the 80s films, I thought of highly when I was a child in the 80s. One was Santa Claus, the movie with John Lithgow and Dudley Moore. I have since recently acquired it as an adult. It's awful. Yes, it was. But that happens so often. When we're a kid, we think a movie's great, and then we see it as an adult, we're like, "Eh." That happens. I was talking with a friend of mine at work. When I was younger, I would read some of that old golden age science fiction and think it was just wonderful because, of course, I loved golden age science fiction, so I was eating it up. And I've reread some of it recently as an adult, and I'm like, this is like second rate, you know, you know, dog dreck, you know, Cobblethwop. But I thought it was really, really good when I was a kid. But now I have more refined tastes. I'm like, no, it fit that bill. It was part of that whole golden age of science fiction. So what I was doing is I was making myself believe it was fantastic, even though it was really second rate. So basically, what I'm saying is, when we all get older, our tastes do become more sophisticated. Retro Nerd Girl says, "Weekend at Bernie's, great stuff." Lance Chafin says, "The right stuff, great stuff." The stuff, great stuff. Emily Miller says, "It's surprising what's still on the books that's it's illegal." Well, you got me there. Sublik says, "Perfect with Jamie Lee Curtis and John Travolta." Well, didn't she apologize about that film later on? Fred Smithberg says, "The Powers of Matthew Starr with Louis Gossett Jr." That was a TV show, wasn't it? But was it a TV show that was based on a movie? I don't know. Lance Chavin says, "Near Dark." I really like that movie. Reggie says, "Saw my first manga film in the early 80s. Goljo 13, The Professional, a James Bond style animation with some of the very first 3D computer graphics incorporated. Very nice style, too." I don't know if I've seen that one. Zublik says, "Look who's talking." I did like the first one. I've only seen the first one. Lance Chaffin, Starman. But wait, was The Power of the Matthew Star based on Starman? Because I think Starman actually also had its own TV show. Maybe they were both ripoffs of Starman. That actually sounds about right. Emily Miller says, "One North Carolina law still in the books. It's illegal to steal kitchen grease." Okay. Form is content. Honestly, the frantic state of modern movies makes old classics like Legend and Princess Bride hard for me to watch now. I can certainly see that. Yeah, yeah. Uh, the styles of filmmaking are so completely different. Zuplik says created Trading Places. I love Trading Places. Lance Chafin says Doctor Detroit. I wish they had made the sequel, The Wrath of Mom. Fred Smithberg says, "Form is content. Just have a mutton, lettuce, and tomato sandwich when the mutton is nice and lean." Okay. Lance Javen says, "DC Cab." Never actually saw it. Richard Nerd Girl says, "Bachelor Party." Definitely saw that one. Daily Dens of Good Stuff says, "I liked this stuff like Terror Train. Loved it. Prophecy. The Monster Movie. Definitely. And the Boogans. I love the Boogans. Horror movies most people missed. Yeah, I actually didn't see the Boogans at the time. I saw it later on like videotape and a buddy's uh doing like a movie marathon. But the Prophecy, that's the one about the big mutated bear. That was a good one. Terror Train's good as well. And holy cow, folks, we're actually getting close to 10 o'clock. So, ooh, Retro Girl has another good one. Children of the Corn. Lance Javen's A Fish Called Wanda. Keithy says you are very caught up at this point. Very caught up. I'm almost waiting for people to make another comment so I can kick in. But anyway, it's getting towards 10 o'clock. So, any other topics you guys want to throw out or anything? I think I'm going to wrap it up at 10 tonight. Uh, but give us a few. That still gives us a few more minutes. Fred Smithwick says it was the Princess Bridge reference. He means bride. No one got the mutton, lettuce, and tomato sandwich reference. I haven't seen the Princess. Yeah, Bride. I was teasing. I haven't seen the Princess Bride in probably 20 years. Johnny says, "Hi, Thrash and all. Thrash mentioned mom from Dr. Detroit, Kate Murtaugh. Had a long career playing big scary women going back to a Twilight Zone episode. Ah, where she played a big scary wife risen from the grave. Oh yeah, the one they go to Boot Hill. Yes, I just saw that one recently. John H. By the way, thank you, John, for joining us. By the way, sadly we're about to wrap up in the next few minutes, but thank you so much for joining us even at this late hour. And that is a great episode of the Twilight Zone. And thank you for the fun fact. A lot of people saying good night. Lynn Chafin says night, Emily. Daily Dan says happy trails with two blue feet. Zublik says, T-Pawns, will you do a Thursday night live chat? Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned it. I'm doing 2 live chats this week. This is my commemorative one because ENC couldn't make it, so I'm keeping the fires burning as it will. But I will still have my regular Thursday night live chat this Thursday. Topics to be determined. Bring your own topic, as I always say. John Doe says, I'm back. John Doe, you're back just in time to say goodbye. We're kind of wrapping things up, but I'm so glad you made it back, son. Johnny says, Garrity and the Graves is the Twilight Zone episode name. Thank you. I couldn't think of it to save my life. That has a great cast. Stanley Adams plays the bartender in that. He played the sort of wacky Polynesian chief in Gilligan's Island, and he also played King of the Vegetables in Lost in Space. And he's Cyrano Jones, the guy who brought the Tribbles to Starfleet in The Trouble with Tribbles. Uh, there you can see. I have trivia too. Resi says Razorback springs to mind, a little surreal in parts, but mostly a gory good. Not familiar with it. We'll have to check it out. Let's just see. Oh, Emily Miller said it's a good one. I can't believe none of you guys mentioned Little Darlings. When that movie came out, I was too young to watch it, and it was a pity because I really wanted to because it's just so risque. But you're right. Yes, that's another good one. But that was 70s too, wasn't it? John Collins says, Bob, you seem like a refined gentleman that might have enjoyed an occasional showing of a taxi cab confessions or two. Looking back, do you think all stories were true or spiced up for HBO? I think everything is embroidered a little. To create a fun narrative, you have to kind of mix things up a little bit. So I'd say all good stories have a certain amount of uh, fluff added to them for narrative's sake. Daily Dan's good stuff. Hey, Pawns, text me your mailing address. Got you something cool at the flea market. Thank you in advance. I certainly will. I certainly will. And thank you in advance. John Doe says, yes, Fred. I think it I thought he was saying, "Did you get me a DeLorean?" Lens Javen says, "The pirate movie." I just had, "Puffin' and a Blowin'" stuck in my head the other day, don't know why. Daryl Jones says, "I'm out, make sure to hit that like button. I'll chat with some of you on Facebook. Have a good night." Yes, Daryl, I will definitely be chatting with you on, Facebook as well, by the way. Possibly not tonight, I got a early morning tomorrow, but, I will be chatting with you on Facebook. And to any of you who haven't joined me on Facebook, who are on Facebook, please do. Form is Content says, "Oh, no, we forgot Stay Tuned with John Ritter." The funniest bit in that whole thing is when they do the, Three's Company bit. And Lewis says, "What is taxi cab confessions? Are they the confessions from taxi drivers or passengers?" If I remember correctly, it was the drivers. Sublik says, "Gary didn't make it tonight." I know it. I thought he just said that earlier that he would. Pity. Maybe he'll make it to Thursdays. Oh, and Lewis says, Darlings came out in 1980. Lance Javens' Sleepaway Camp. Resi says, "Gotta go check out Society, Goljo, 13, and Razorback if you can. They're all worth your while. Thanks for engaging in the full stream." Resi, thank you so much for joining us. Take care. And remember, I got another show on Thursday. And just scrolling, a lot of people saying good night to everybody. Um, oh, Zublik says, yes, John T. Pond said it was the biggest bomb, but I disagree. Fred Smith says little darlings with rocket launchers and one-liners might be cool. In any event, in any will, guys, like I said, I should be wrapping things up now. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I will see you this coming Thursday. It's probably going to be 8:30 next time. That's a hard 8:30 as opposed to coming in a little early tonight. In any event, until this coming Thursday, be good, be safe, be careful, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again very, 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 very soon. Peace.